When a billionaire destroyed his boat, the town laughed, until 6 warships arrived. Welcome to our storytelling journey, where every voice matters and every tale holds a deeper truth. If you're enjoying this video, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss tomorrow's special story. It's one you won't want to miss. Thank you for being part of this community. Walter Hayes was 74 years old, and every wrinkle on his sun-touched face seemed to echo a memory of the sea. For nearly half a century he'd lived in Maple Bay, a quiet coastal town in Oregon where the day fog rolled in like a secret and the ocean spoke in waves. His mornings began long before sunrise. By 5 a.m., Walter would already be untying the lines of his wooden boat, Freedom Spirit, heading toward the mouth of the bay where the sky met the horizon in hues of lavender and gold. Freedom Spirit wasn't much to look at anymore. The once bright paint had dulled under decades of salt and sun. Its wooden hull groaned with age, each creak a conversation between man and tide. But to Walter, it was more than just a boat. It was his sanctuary, his compass, and the only place where the echoes of war grew silent. After returning from Southeast Asia as a Navy machinist, he had built Freedom Spirit by hand, plank by plank, sanding each curve with a care that bordered on reverence. For him, it wasn't just carpentry, it was healing. Most of the townsfolk didn't know much about Walter's past. They knew he was Navy, they knew he lived alone, and they sometimes heard him shouting in the middle of the night when the wind was still and the sea was quiet. But Walter never spoke of his time overseas. He didn't talk about the ship he'd helped save during a chemical leak, or the comrades he'd lost. Instead, he let his silence do the speaking and his boat do the living. But Maple Bay was changing. Once a working-class harbor town, it had become a weekend escape for the wealthy. Old bait shops were replaced with artisan cafes. The marina now held more yachts than fishing vessels. To most, Walter's boat was an eyesore. Too old, too simple, too real. That morning began like any other. The water was glassy, the sky a soft gray. Walter had just tied off a line after checking his crab pots when he heard it, a deep mechanical hum that didn't belong to the bay. As he turned, a massive white yacht cut through the mist like a blade, heading straight toward him. Its name, Ocean Bloom, gleamed in silver script along the hull. At the helm stood a man in sunglasses and a designer jacket, Brandon Cole, a 39-year-old tech mogul who'd recently bought the largest beachfront estate in town. Walter waved, signaling his position, but the yacht didn't slow. His voice was lost in the roar of the engines. And in that moment, time seemed to freeze. What came next would change everything, not just for Walter Hayes, but for a town that had forgotten the quiet power of a man who never asked to be noticed. The sound of impact was sickening, a deep, splintering crunch that echoed across the harbor like a cannon shot. Freedom Spirit buckled under the weight of Ocean Bloom's steel bow, its stern shattering into the water as if it were nothing more than driftwood. Walter barely managed to leap onto the dock, landing hard on his left hip, the breath knocked out of him. Around him, no one moved. A few joggers slowed, tourists paused, phones raised, but no one reached out. He turned, eyes wide with disbelief, as his boat, his life's work, split apart and sank into the bay. And then he saw it, his American flag, the one he had flown every day for 40 years, caught in the wake, torn loose, and drifting. Its stars and stripes twisted in the water, the red bleeding into the foam like something sacred being lost. The engines on the yacht finally cut. The sudden silence was deafening. From the deck above, Brandon Cole's voice rang out, flat, annoyed, and just loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's just an old fishing tub," he scoffed. "Get over it." Walter didn't answer. He couldn't. His legs were trembling, not from fear, but from fury he had no words for. Slowly, he made his way to the edge of the dock, knelt, despite the sharp protest in his knees, and reached into the cold water. He pulled the flag from the bay, drenched and torn, and held it against his chest like it was something alive, something irreplaceable. The harbor patrol boat drifted closer. The officer on board hesitated, then stepped onto the dock with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said carefully, "I'm going to need to file a report." Walter didn't even look up. He was staring at the wreckage. Not the broken wood, but everything it meant. That boat had carried him through storms, literal and emotional. It was where he found peace when sleep wouldn't come, where he wrote in his weather log, where he watched the world change and quietly stayed the same. Behind him, someone laughed. A phone pinged. The video was already online, zoomed in on an old man clutching a soggy flag, his boat in pieces behind him. The caption read, "Boomer meltdown after yacht crash." It went viral in less than an hour. By noon, the harbor had returned to business as usual. The debris was cleared, the dock was clean, and Walter Hayes, war hero, boat builder, and man of the sea, sat alone in his modest home above the bay, overlooking waters that had once embraced him. Now, they simply looked empty. No visit from the police, no call from the yacht owner, no apology, just silence, and a trending hashtag, "Old boat, old news, but the sea." Walter thought as he folded the torn flag and placed it gently beside his medals, "Never forgets its own." The next morning, Maple Bay awoke to something strange, something no one expected. Fog had rolled in thick and low, blanketing the harbor like a curtain drawn across a stage. Walter Hayes sat on his porch, same as always, a cooling cup of coffee resting in his hands. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boat breaking apart. Freedom spirit? Gone. And for what? So someone could pop champagne. On a Tuesday morning? But then just after 6 a.m., the foghorn sounded. 3 deep blasts. Not the usual fog signal. This was different. This was Navy code. Walter sat up, spine straightening without thinking. 3 long tones meant large vessels were approaching the harbor, and then they appeared. Out of the mist came shadows, big ones, long, sleek, and moving in perfect formation. 6 gray ships, each one a sentinel from the past, cutting through the water with disciplined precision. No music, no announcements, just the quiet thunder of engines and the sudden collective breath of a town caught off guard. The first ship, a guided missile destroyer, docked at the main pier with surgical accuracy. On its deck stood a man in dress whites, chest full of medals, posture like steel. Rear Admiral Raymond Scott. Walter recognized the name from years ago. He'd served under Scott's father in the Pacific. At precisely 6:20, the gangway lowered. A color guard descended first, flags folded tightly in their arms, movement crisp and practiced. Then came Admiral Scott, carrying a triangularly folded American flag, the kind reserved for funerals. Walter felt something stir deep in his chest. That fold, he knew it. He'd made it dozens of times for men who never came home. Slowly, he stood, the pain in his knees forgotten, his breath tight. He walked down the slope from his house to the dock as the townspeople began to gather. Shopkeepers left their registers. Tourists paused their selfies. Even the kids grew quiet. No one quite understood what was happening, but everyone knew it mattered. The crowd parted as Walter stepped onto the dock. Admiral Scott spotted him immediately and raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Chief Petty Officer Walter Hayes," he said, his voice strong and clear. "Permission to come ashore and render honors." Walter saluted back, instinct overriding emotion. "Permission granted, Admiral." The Admiral handed him the flag, this one crisp, perfect, dry. Then he turned to the crowd. 40 years ago, he began, this man sealed a failing coolant system aboard the USS Hamilton during a tropical storm. He suffered third-degree burns across his back and arms, saving 128 men in their sleep. He never spoke of it, never asked for anything. Yesterday, his boat was destroyed. His flag was left to sink, but the United States Navy does not forget its own. A silence fell like a blanket. Phones lowered, heads bowed. The harbor, once a stage for mockery, became a sacred ground. And for the first time since the crash, Walter Hayes felt something stir besides pain. He felt seen. The ceremony ended, but the silence lingered. As the Navy ships pulled away from the dock, the town of Maple Bay remained still, caught between shame and awakening. What began as a tribute to one man had become something more, a mirror held up to a community that had forgotten what quiet valor looked like. Walter Hayes didn't ask for applause. He didn't bask in the sudden shift in attention. He simply folded the gifted flag with care and walked home, his back a little straighter, his steps a little heavier with the weight of memory. But something had changed. That afternoon, the same harbor master who had cited modern boating standards knocked on Walter's front door. He came not with excuses but with a lifetime fishing permit and an apology barely squeezed past his pride. "We should have seen you," he said. "All these years, we just didn't look." Over the next few days, others followed. Neighbors, strangers, even the local marina owner offered a free slip for any vessel you ever decide to put back in the water. Children who once ran past him without a glance now sat beside him, wide-eyed, asking about knots and tides and the time he saw a whale breach under a full moon. Walter didn't tell war stories, but he told sea stories, and somehow they were enough. Then, on the third day after the ceremony, Brandon Cole returned. He didn't arrive with an entourage or a news crew. No yacht, no champagne. Just a man, sunglasses pushed up onto his head, standing awkwardly at the edge of the dock where Freedom's Spirit once moored. Walter was teaching a few local kids how to tie a bowline when he noticed him. "Mr. Hayes," Brandon began, his voice unsure. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Walter nodded to the children. "Take 5, he said, rising slowly to his feet. Brandon stepped closer, then stopped. "I came to apologize. My behavior, it was disgraceful. I didn't know who you were. But that's no excuse." He held out an envelope. "There's a blank check inside. You name the number, I'll make it right." Walter didn't take it. "Money won't rebuild what was lost," he said, his voice even. Brandon looked down, visibly humbled. "Then tell me what will. Because I was an ass, and now I'm all over the internet as the guy who destroyed a hero's boat." Walter paused, studying him. Not the suit, not the wealth, but the man underneath. "There's a spot on the eastern pier," he said slowly. "It catches the sunrise. Build a bench there, a good one. Have it carved with 3 words. Sit. Remember. Thank." Brandon blinked. "That's it. That's enough," Walter replied. "Some folks just need a place to stop and remember what matters." 2 days later, a teakwood bench arrived, hand-carved by a craftsman from Seattle. Brandon came to help install it himself. He worked in silence, his hands blistered but steady, and for the first time, he wasn't the center of attention. He was part of something bigger. 1 week later, the morning air smelled of salt and sawdust. Walter. Hayes sat on the same bench he'd requested. Sit. Remember, thank. Watching the harbor breathe in the early light. The sea was calm, the sky blushed with orange, and for the first time since the crash, there was a strange stillness in him. Not silence, but peace. That's when he heard the horn. Not loud, not dramatic, just a single, low blast from the mouth of the bay. He looked up and saw something approaching, a small wooden vessel gliding through the water with a familiar grace. At the helm stood his grandson, Ethan, one hand steady on the wheel, the other waving like a child who had just built his first treehouse. The boat drew closer, and Walter's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Freedom's Spirit, but it might as well have been. The shape, the curve of the hull, the color of the wood, it was all there. The only difference was the shine. This one was new, its brass rails gleaming, navigation lights blinking softly in the morning haze. Ethan tied her off at the exact mooring spot where the original had once lived. "Surprise, Grandpa," he said, smiling from ear to ear. "We found your old plans. They were in the shed. The Boat Builders Association donated the materials. Vets from 4 states came to help. Even the marina guy pitched in." Walter didn't speak. He stepped forward, reached out a weathered hand, and touched the bow. The grain of the wood was warm beneath his palm. He stepped aboard like a man rediscovering his own heartbeat. "It's got a new name," Ethan said quietly, pointing to the stern. In crisp white letters, the paint read, "Freedom's Legacy." "It's not exactly the same," Ethan admitted. "We added radar, updated the comms, reinforced the hull. But the soul, your soul, is in every plank." Walter turned, tears brimming in his eyes. "You didn't rebuild a boat," he said softly. "You rebuilt my purpose." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, the harbor was full of life again. Children played along the shore. Couples stopped to read the bench. Locals brought lawn chairs and dinner plates just to be close to the water. And Walter sailed Freedom's Legacy out for her first journey. No crab pots. No fishing gear. Just him and Ethan drifting along the edge of town. When they returned, a young boy waited on the dock. "Sir," he asked, "will you teach me how to make the knot that never slips?" Walter smiled. "That one's called a bowline," he said. "Been saving lives for hundreds of years." From that day forward, Walter became more than just the old man with a boat. He was a teacher, a keeper of tradition, a reminder that some things, like respect, craftsmanship, and quiet courage, never go out of style. And every morning, when the fog rolled in and the bench caught the first light of day, the town remembered not just a boat, but the man who taught them how to anchor themselves to what truly matters. If this story moved you in any way, we'd love to hear from you. What part of Walter's journey stayed with you the most? Have you ever known someone like him? Quiet, steady, and full of untold strength? Maybe it's a grandparent, a neighbor, a veteran who never asked for recognition but changed lives just by being present. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. We read every message and truly appreciate hearing your perspectives. Your words might just inspire someone else who's scrolling by. In a world that moves fast and often forgets the people who built its foundation, let's create a space where stories like Walter's are remembered, honored, and passed on. Would you have built the bench? Would you have stood up when no one else did? Let's talk about it, and don't forget, subscribing helps us continue bringing real, powerful stories like this to light. The next episode drops tomorrow, and trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming. Your voice matters. Here, so pull up a seat, join the conversation, and help us keep the spirit of gratitude alive.